She was locked in a cell made of thick iron bars, but even those bars shook whenever she pulled at them. The guards outside never relaxed. Every time she moved, they gripped their weapons tighter. She was not like the other alien captives. She was taller, stronger, and her wild eyes burned with a fire no one could put out. The people of the colony called her untamable, and they feared her more than they feared the raiders beyond the walls. It was said she had broken 6 sets of chains already. Each time they replaced them with stronger ones, and still she tore them apart. She bit one soldier's hand so badly that he nearly bled to death. Another time, she headbutted a guard and shattered his nose. She never stayed silent. Day and night she roared, cursed, and shook the cell until her hands bled. The other prisoners watched her in silence, too afraid to even speak when she was near. She carried an aura of rage, like a storm wrapped in flesh. Children were warned never to go close to the prison hall where she was kept. Stories spread about her, half true, half twisted. Some said she had killed an entire squad of armed men with only her bare hands. Some whispered she was cursed, a creature born to destroy, not to live in peace. Others claimed she was a queen once, but had fallen into chains after losing her throne. None of these tales could be proven, but they only added to her terrifying image. The colony leaders tried many ways to control her. They starved her, but she only laughed, as if hunger was a joke to her. They tried to beat her into submission, but each time they struck her, she spat blood in their faces and stared with eyes that promised revenge. They gave her no weapon, yet she turned her very body into one. Her nails became claws, her teeth became fangs. The more they tried to break her, the stronger she seemed to grow in spirit. The guards who had to watch her hated the task. They whispered to each other, making bets on how long before she killed one of them. "She cannot be tamed," one would mutter. "She is like fire. You cannot hold fire in your hands." Another would nod and keep his distance, clutching his gun like a lifeline. Even the toughest men admitted they felt a chill run through their bones whenever her gaze landed on them. Yet, beneath all the fear and anger, there were moments no one noticed. Late at night, when the hall was empty and only the sound of her heavy breathing filled the air, she sat quietly with her knees drawn close. Her hands, rough from chains, shook slightly as if from pain, not rage. Sometimes she whispered words in her own language, words no one understood. Her voice was softer then, almost like a wounded animal calling out to someone who would never answer. But those moments vanished as soon as anyone entered. The instant footsteps echoed. She rose again, standing tall, her muscles tense, her teeth bared. She never let them see weakness. She never gave them the satisfaction of believing she could be broken. To the colony, she remained the fiercest, most dangerous woman they had ever captured. The council debated about her again and again. Some said she should be executed, for she was too great a threat. Others argued she could be useful, perhaps trained to fight against their enemies. But no one volunteered to take the risk. Who could live in the same space as this wild creature without being torn apart? Who could even speak to her without feeling her hatred burn into their soul? The people began to believe she was more than just a prisoner. They thought she was a curse on the colony itself, a shadow that would bring disaster if she remained. Yet no one dared to approach the cell to finish her. Fear was stronger than their anger. They chose instead to lock her deeper in chains, to leave her in the dark and hope she faded away. Still, she did not fade. Her spirit blazed brighter than ever. The harder they tried to bury her, the louder her presence grew. Her roars shook the walls, echoing through the colony at night like thunder. Children cried when they heard her voice, and even adults admitted unease. She was untamable, and the people could do nothing but wait for the day her chains would finally fail again. And that day came closer. Her wrists bled where the cuffs dug in, but she never stopped pulling. Her eyes glowed when she stared at the weak spots in the metal. She tested them each day, slowly, carefully, always learning. The guards thought she was wasting energy, but in truth, she was waiting for the right moment. Everyone in the colony believed one thing without doubt. If she ever got free, no wall would stand against her, no soldier would stop her, and no mercy would fall upon those who had caged her. She would bring chaos, destruction, and fire. The untamable woman would not forgive, not forget, and not rest until every chain was broken. That was the fear that lived in the hearts of all who knew her story. That was why no one dared go near. And that was why, when a single human later stepped forward and said he would take her in, the entire colony laughed, shook their heads, and whispered to each other that the man was already dead. He just did not know it yet. The news spread through the colony like wildfire. The human who worked as a mechanic, a quiet man who usually kept to himself, had stood up in the council hall and said he would take her in. The untamable alien woman, feared by all, would no longer stay locked in the prison. People gasped, laughed, and shouted at him. They called him mad. They warned him he would not survive a single night in the same house with her. But he did not step back. His eyes were calm, and his voice steady when he said, "She has been treated like a beast, but she is not one. I will take her." The council was shocked. Some thought he was making a joke, others thought he was suicidal. But the law of the colony was clear. If a person volunteered responsibility for a prisoner, the council had to allow it. They tried to talk him out of it, saying he was too weak, saying he was just a simple man who fixed machines and cleaned gears. He was not a soldier, not a fighter. How would he keep such a dangerous creature under control? Still, he refused to change his mind. He signed his name on the paper, and it was done. When the guards brought her out of the cell, the colony gathered to watch. They wanted to see how the fierce woman would tear him apart the moment she was freed from the underground prison. Chains rattled as two soldiers pushed her forward, their hands trembling as they held her. She walked with her head high, her eyes scanning the crowd with open hatred. She did not look broken. She looked like a storm waiting to explode. The human stood waiting at the edge of the square. He did not have weapons in his hands. He did not wear armor like the soldiers. He only carried a small toolkit strapped to his belt, the same one he used every day in his workshop. People whispered, "He is a fool. She will kill him before sunrise." The alien woman's gaze fell on him, sharp and dangerous. For a long moment, they stared at each other. He did not flinch. When they placed the chains in his hands, he did something no one expected. He did not pull hard or show force. He held them gently, as if he was not dragging a beast but walking beside a person. She growled, baring her teeth, testing his reaction. But he only nodded and said, "Come." His voice was not loud, not commanding, but steady. Something in his calmness made her pause. She could have yanked the chains from his grip, but she didn't. The crowd murmured in confusion as they walked away together. That night, silence fell over the colony. People waited for the screams, the sound of struggle, the call for help. But no sound came from the small house at the edge of the settlement where the mechanic lived. Inside, the air was tense. He had placed her in the main room, tying her to a support beam with heavy chains. He gave her water and food, then sat down across from her without fear. She did not eat at first. She watched him with eyes filled with suspicion, waiting for him to hit her, to mock her, to treat her as the others had. But he did none of that. He worked quietly on a broken generator at the corner of the room. Sparks lit the air, the sound of tools clicking against metal filling the silence. At last, he spoke without looking at her. "I don't want to fight you. I only want peace. If you want food, eat. If you don't, leave it. The choice is yours." His calm tone was strange to her. She had only known chains, commands, and blows. She narrowed her eyes, unsure of what kind of game this human was playing. Hours passed. The house was dim, lit only by a lantern. The alien woman tested the chains, pulling at them, shaking them until the wood creaked. She wanted to see if he would panic, but he didn't move. He only adjusted a screw on the generator, wiped the sweat from his brow, and kept working. Finally, she spoke for the first time since stepping into his home. Her voice was low, rough, like gravel scraping stone. She whispered words in broken human tongue. "Why? You not fear me?" The human lifted his head and met her eyes. "Because fear will not help either of us," he said simply. His answer was strange to her. Every other human she had met had shown fear, anger, or cruelty. But this one, this quiet man with tired hands, showed none of it. He did not treat her as a monster. That night, long after midnight, the human lay on his bed and she sat chained to the beam. The silence grew heavier. The fire in her eyes had not gone out, but something new flickered inside them, confusion. She had expected screams, expected blood, expected violence. Instead, there was only calmness. and it unsettled her more than any weapon could. When the moonlight slipped through the cracks of the window, she leaned forward as far as the chains allowed and spoke again. Her words were soft but sharp like a blade. "Human, you will die, but not tonight." She said it as a warning, yet her voice carried something else, something uncertain. The human, half awake, only murmured, "Then tomorrow will be enough," before turning over and falling asleep. She stared at him in disbelief. He had closed his eyes in front of her, giving her the chance to kill him easily. No soldier, no guard, no leader had ever trusted her enough to lower their guard. She could have snapped his neck in seconds, but her hands did not move. For reasons she could not understand, she stayed still, her gaze locked on him until morning light crept into the room. By dawn, the colony expected to hear of his death. Instead, the mechanic walked out of his house alive, carrying his tools as usual. The alien woman remained inside, chained but strangely quiet. The people whispered in shock. And in that silence, the first seed of something new had been planted, something even she could not yet name. The night stretched on, heavy and tense. The alien woman sat chained to the beam, her body tense like a predator ready to strike at any moment. The human worked quietly at his table, fixing small machines with the same calm patience he always carried. The soft clink of tools filled the silence, but her sharp eyes never left him. She studied every movement he made, waiting for weakness, waiting for fear to show in his face. But it never came. She wanted to break him. She leaned forward, rattled the chains so hard that dust fell from the ceiling. Her growl was deep, meant to frighten. "You sleep, I kill you," she said in broken words. He looked up for a moment, then back to his work. "Then you'll have to stay awake all night," he answered without a trace of fear. His calmness frustrated her. She wanted him to scream, to beg, to run. That was what humans always did around her. But this one, this strange man, acted as if her threats were nothing more than the sound of wind. Hours passed, and the human finally put down his tools. He filled a bowl with warm food and set it near her. "Eat. You are hungry," he said simply. She snarled, refusing to touch it. In her mind, taking food from him meant weakness. She wanted to show she did not need his kindness. But when he turned his back and lay on his bed, her stomach betrayed her. The smell of the food twisted inside her. She had been starved in the prison, fed scraps like an animal. Slowly, silently, she leaned forward and ate with her bound hands. The taste made her eyes close for a moment. It was real food, not scraps, and it stirred something she had long forgotten, what it felt like to be treated as a living being. When she looked back, the human was watching her from his bed. But he did not smile in victory. He did not mock her for giving in. He simply nodded once, as if to say, "Good." That simple gesture confused her more than any chain could. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and hissed, "Why? Why feed me?" He answered quietly, his voice steady in the dark. "Because you are not an animal. You are alive. That is reason enough." The words struck her harder than any whip had. She wanted to laugh, to curse, to spit in his face. But her throat closed, and no sound came. She looked away, hiding her expression in the shadows. His words had touched something buried deep, something she had locked away for years. Later, when the house grew quiet, she began testing him in new ways. She pulled at the chains suddenly, jerking toward him as if to attack. Most men would have jumped, panicked, maybe even struck her. He only glanced at the chains, checked that they were holding, then returned to his work. "You'll hurt your wrists," he said softly, like a warning, not a threat. The calmness in his voice made her fists clench in anger. Why was he not afraid? Why did he not hate her? At one point, she whispered words in her own language, a curse meant to wound his pride. He did not understand, but the tone was clear. Still, he didn't react with anger. Instead, he answered, "If you want me to understand you, teach me." She froze, stunned at his response. No one had ever asked her to teach anything. No one had ever treated her as if her language mattered. That night, as the moonlight filtered through the cracks of the window, the alien woman found herself unsettled. She had come into this home with one thought: to test, to break, to dominate this foolish human who dared to take her in. But every move she made only left her more confused. He did not fight back. He did not try to own her. He simply treated her as if she was worth more than the chains on her body. The hours dragged, but she could not sleep. Her mind kept replaying his words. "You are not an animal." They sounded strange, almost dangerous, because no one had ever said them before. In the prison, she had been treated as less than dirt. The guards mocked her, beat her, starved her. Even her own people had abandoned her. But now, in this tiny house with broken machines and the smell of oil, one human refused to see her as a monster. When the human finally drifted into sleep, she stared at him in silence. His breathing was steady, his face calm. He had turned his back to her again, showing no fear. She could have killed him so easily. Just one sharp move, and his life would end. The thought rushed through her head again and again. Yet her hands stayed still. Something inside her resisted the idea. For reasons she could not understand, she did not want to harm him. Instead, she whispered into the quiet room, words so soft even she barely heard them. Words from her own tongue, words of sorrow and loss. She spoke to the ghosts of her past, not to him. But somehow speaking them in his presence felt different, lighter, as if the weight she carried had shifted a little. When the first light of dawn slipped into the house, she had not closed her eyes once. The human rose, stretched, and went about his routine as if nothing had happened. He gave her more food, fixed another machine, and hummed a quiet tune while he worked. She watched him with narrowed eyes, trying to decide what kind of man he truly was. She wanted to believe he was a fool. She wanted to believe he would soon show his cruelty, like all the others. But deep inside, a dangerous thought was growing. What if he truly was different? What if, for the first time in her life, someone looked at her and did not see a beast? The untamable woman sat in chains, but the fire in her chest burned with new confusion. For the first time, she did not know whether she was the one testing the human, or if he was the one testing her. The news spread quickly across the colony. The mechanic was keeping the alien woman in his house, and he was still alive after 2 nights. People whispered in the streets, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some said he must have found a trick to control her. Others said it was only a matter of time before she ripped him apart. Mothers pulled their children close when they passed his home, warning them never to go near. Soldiers stood on corners, watching the little house with suspicion, waiting for screams to come from inside. By the 3rd day, the council called him to speak. They told him he was reckless, that the colony could not risk keeping such a dangerous creature alive. "She is a threat to all of us," one councilman shouted. "She should be executed before she brings disaster." Others demanded she be sent back to the prison where she belonged. But the mechanic stood firm, his voice calm and steady. "She is not a beast," he said. "She has more strength than all of us. But strength does not make her evil. She deserves a chance." The room exploded with angry voices. People called him a fool. Some accused him of being bewitched by her alien beauty. Others accused him of betraying his own kind. Yet through the storm of insults, he stood silently, refusing to step back. His hands were rough and oil-stained, not the hands of a soldier, but they gripped the table with quiet determination. Finally, when the shouting died down, he spoke again. "If she is to be judged, let her be judged by her actions, not by your fear." His words unsettled many, for deep inside they knew fear was the only weapon they had against her. When he returned home that evening, the alien woman was watching from her place against the beam. She had heard the crowd outside during the day, shouting and cursing. She had seen the stones some had thrown at the walls of his house. Her lips curled into a cold smile when he walked in. "They hate you now," she said in her rough voice. "You protect me, they will turn against you." He set down his tools, wiping sweat from his brow. "Maybe," he answered, "but I don't care." His words surprised her. Most humans were slaves to the crowd, desperate to fit in, desperate not to be hated. But this one was different. He stood alone, even against his own people. That night, the tension grew heavier. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering in the dark. Some wanted to burn his house down, to destroy both him and the alien woman before she brought more trouble. Soldiers stood nearby, debating whether to storm inside and take her by force. The mechanic saw the shadows outside his window, but he did not move her from the beam, nor did he hide. He simply sat at his work table, hammering quietly, while she sat chained, her eyes glinting in the dim lantern light. She asked him suddenly, "Why do you fight for me? I am not your blood. I am not your kind." Her tone was sharp, almost mocking. But beneath it, there was something else, something she herself did not understand. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because you remind me of myself," he said softly. "Everyone thinks I am weak, worthless, just a man who fixes broken machines. But I know what it feels like to be looked at as nothing. That is why I cannot look at you the same way they do." Her eyes narrowed, but her chest tightened in a way she did not expect. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had dared to compare themselves to her, the untamable one. She wanted to laugh at his foolishness, but the sound would not come. Instead, she turned her face away, hiding the strange feeling growing inside her. The night grew colder, and the whispers outside grew louder. Finally, footsteps approached the door. A group of men banged their fists against it, shouting for the mechanic to give her up. "She will kill us all," they cried. "If you don't hand her over, we'll drag her out ourselves." The alien woman's eyes lit with fire. She pulled at her chains, snarling, ready to face them. But the mechanic rose first. He opened the door and stepped out, standing in the moonlight with his sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hands blackened with oil. The men shouted at him, cursed him, demanded he move aside. But he did not move. He blocked the doorway with his body, his voice firm. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The men froze, shocked. They expected fear, expected him to hand her over to save himself. But there he stood, a simple mechanic facing down armed men without a single weapon in his hand. The alien woman, watching from the shadows inside, felt her chest tighten again. Something sharp, something new, cut through her anger. This human, fragile and small compared to her strength, was defending her when he had no reason to. The men outside muttered among themselves, uncertain. Some wanted to push past him, but others hesitated. They could see in his eyes that he would not step aside, no matter what. Finally, one of the soldiers spat on the ground and growled, "You'll regret this," before turning away. The crowd dispersed slowly, their anger still burning but their courage broken. When he closed the door and returned inside, the alien woman was still staring at him. For a long time, she said nothing. Finally, her lips curved into a strange expression, not quite a smile, but not her usual scowl either. "You are a fool," she muttered, "but you are a brave fool." He only shrugged, sitting down again with his tools. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I would rather be a fool who stands than a coward who kneels." Her gaze lingered on him long after he had returned to his work. For the first time in years, she felt something shift inside her, a crack in the walls she had built around her heart. She did not understand it yet, but she knew one thing with certainty. The man who had taken her in was not like any human she had ever known. And because of that, she could not look at him the same way anymore. The night was quiet at first, the air heavy with smoke from the colony's chimneys. But then the alarms began to ring, sharp and urgent. The sound of horns echoed through the streets, and people ran shouting that raiders had come. The enemy had slipped through the outer defenses, and fire lit up the far side of the settlement. Panic spread like wildfire. Women pulled their children into hiding, soldiers rushed to grab their weapons, and the once peaceful night turned into chaos. Inside the small house, the alien woman's head snapped up. Her ears caught the screams and the clash of steel in the distance. The mechanic dropped his tools instantly, his face pale but steady. He knew what the alarms meant. Raiders had come many times before, and every time, blood was spilled. He turned toward her, his eyes locking on the chains that held her. "Stay here," he said quickly, grabbing for a wrench he used as a weapon. But she was already straining at the cuffs. Her muscles tensed, her eyes glowing with fury. She could feel the heat of battle in her bones. Her kind were born for this. The smell of fire, the cries of fear, it called to something inside her that had been caged for too long. She yanked hard once, twice, and the wood beam cracked. With a final roar, the chains snapped free. The mechanic spun around, staring in shock as she stood tall, her wrists bleeding, but her spirit blazing. For a brief second, he thought she would turn on him. The same thought rushed through his mind as it had every night. If she wanted, she could kill him in an instant. But she didn't. Instead, she moved toward the door, her eyes fixed on the sound of danger outside. "They come for your people," she growled, "and you cannot stop them." Before he could answer, she burst through the door. The mechanic rushed after her, calling her name, But she was already moving like lightning. The crowd of raiders had entered the colony, setting fire to homes and dragging away supplies. Soldiers fought desperately, but they were outnumbered. Children screamed and families hid wherever they could. And then, in the middle of it all, the alien woman appeared. The raiders froze when they saw her. Some had heard stories of her strength, and now those stories came alive. With a cry that shook the air, she launched herself into the fight. Her chains still hung from her wrists like whips, and she used them as weapons, striking raiders to the ground. She tore weapons from their hands, snapped blades in two, and flung armored men aside as if they were straw. Firelight gleamed on her skin as she moved faster than any eye could follow. The colonists watched in disbelief. This was the same woman they had feared, the same prisoner they had wanted to execute. Now she was their shield, fighting harder than any soldier. She smashed through a group of raiders who had cornered a family, lifting a burning beam off a trapped child. She let out a roar, and the enemy stumbled back in terror. She looked untamable, yes, but not as a monster. She looked like a warrior unleashed. The mechanic fought too, swinging his wrench at raiders who came too close. He was no soldier, but his courage burned brighter than fear. More than once, he saw her step in front of him, her body shielding him from blows that would have ended his life. She fought like she had something to protect, not just something to destroy. And every time their eyes met in the chaos, something silent passed between them. By dawn, the raiders were fleeing. Their dead lay scattered in the streets, their weapons abandoned. The fires were being put out, the smoke rising into the morning sky. The colony was battered, but it was still standing. And at the center of it all stood the alien woman, her chest rising and falling, her chains broken, her eyes still burning with fire. The colonists gathered around, staring in awe. None of them knew what to say. The woman they had hated, the one they had called a curse, had saved them all. Whispers spread through the crowd. Some called her a savior, others a demon who had turned her fury on the right enemy this time. But no one could deny what they had seen with their own eyes. She had fought for them, not against them. She turned toward the mechanic, her expression unreadable. The people watched closely, holding their breath. Would she attack him now? Would she run free into the wild? But instead, she walked to him slowly, blood running down her arms from her torn wrists. She looked him in the eyes and asked, in a voice rough but steady, "Why? Why protect me when they hate me?" The crowd fell silent. Everyone strained to hear his answer. The mechanic wiped the sweat from his face, his hands trembling from exhaustion, but his voice was calm. "Because you are more than chains," he said. "And tonight, you proved it." The alien woman stared at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her eyes. She was used to being feared, hated, treated like a beast. But this human, this fragile mechanic, had stood by her even when his own people turned against him. She clenched her fists, then slowly let them relax. For the first time in years, she did not feel completely alone. The colony still looked at her with suspicion. The fear had not vanished, but now it mixed with respect. She had saved their children, defended their homes, fought with the strength of 10 soldiers. No one could deny her power. But for the first time, her power had been used to protect, not to destroy. That night, when the fires had been put out and the bodies buried, the mechanic sat by the lantern light repairing broken tools. The alien woman sat across from him, unchained. She could have left, could have vanished into the wild. But she didn't. She stayed in his house, silent, her eyes fixed on him. Something had changed between them, something deep and unspoken. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The night after the raid, the colony was quiet, but the silence was heavy. People still looked at her with fear when she passed, but their eyes also carried something new: respect. Children whispered about the way she had thrown raiders like dolls. Some of the soldiers, the same ones who had once mocked her, lowered their heads when she walked by. But none of that seemed to matter to her. She stayed close to the mechanic's home, watching him as he worked, never saying much. It was as if she was waiting for something, though even she did not know what. That evening, when the fires had died and the air was cold, she sat in the corner of the house, staring into the shadows. The mechanic was repairing a broken piece of equipment, his hands steady even though his body was sore from the fight. At last she spoke, her voice low and heavy. "You want to know why I fight," she said. He looked up from his work and nodded silently. She hesitated, then let out a long breath. "I was not always like this. I was not always a prisoner." Her eyes grew distant, as if she were looking back through years of pain. "Once I was a leader. My people followed me. I was strong, and I carried their hopes. But strength makes enemies, and power makes others jealous. They betrayed me. They chained me, handed me over like an animal to be sold. The same people who once bowed before me threw stones when I fell." Her voice cracked just slightly, but she quickly clenched her fists and forced the weakness away. "That is why I hate chains. That is why I will never kneel." The mechanic set his tools down and listened quietly. He did not interrupt, did not question, only gave her silence to fill with her truth. She looked at him with narrowed eyes, half expecting to see mockery or disbelief. But his gaze was steady, soft even, and that unsettled her more than anger ever could. "I was beaten, starved, humiliated," she continued. "They thought they could turn me into a weapon for their wars, but I fought them at every turn. I would rather die in chains than live as a dog." She looked away, her jaw tight. "That is the truth of the untamable woman, not because I wanted to be feared, but because fear was all I had left." The mechanic finally spoke, his voice gentle. "And now?" Her eyes flickered toward him, confusion flashing across her face. She had expected pity, perhaps even horror at her story. But he asked only that one question. She stayed silent for a long time, then whispered, "Now, I do not know." The words felt strange in her mouth. For years, she had been certain of everything, her hatred, her rage, her refusal to bend. But something inside her was shifting. She remembered the way he had stood in front of the crowd, blocking them from dragging her away. She remembered how he had walked into battle with nothing but a wrench, and how he had fought at her side. She remembered the way he had looked at her after the raid, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet trust. No one had ever looked at her like that. That night, when she closed her eyes, her dreams were filled with faces from her past, those who betrayed her, those who chained her. But in the middle of those dark memories, another face appeared. The mechanic's. His calm eyes, his steady hands, his voice that never rose in anger. She woke with a start, her chest tight, her hands trembling. For the first time in years, she felt uncertain about who she was. The next day, the council gathered again. This time, their anger was less sharp. Some argued she should be honored for saving the colony. Others still wanted her gone, fearing she would turn on them one day. The mechanic stood before them again, saying nothing about himself, only about her. "She chose to fight for us," he said firmly. "If she wanted, she could have left us to burn, but she stayed." His words echoed in the chamber, and the people had no answer. When he returned home, she was waiting. Her eyes were unreadable, but her voice was heavy with meaning. "You spoke for me again," she said. He nodded, as if it was nothing. But to her, it was not nothing. It was everything. No one had ever defended her twice. No one had ever believed she could be more than a beast. That evening, she sat closer to him than before. Not chained, not forced, but by choice. She watched as he worked, his hands black with oil, his brow wet with sweat. For a long time, she said nothing, then finally whispered, "You are strange, human. You treat me like I am worth saving." He glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Because you are." The words struck her deeper than any blade. She turned her face away quickly, hiding the strange heat in her eyes. She did not want him to see the way her chest ached, the way her heart beat faster. She told herself it was weakness, but a part of her knew it was something else, something she had buried long ago when her people betrayed her. Later that night, when the house was dark and quiet, she whispered again, but not to him. This time she whispered to herself, "Maybe I am not only rage." The words trembled in the air, fragile as glass. Outside, the colony still watched her with suspicion. But inside that small home, something had begun to change. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her past lifting, if only a little. And for the first time, she wondered if being untamable did not mean being alone. The mechanic, half asleep on his bed, turned and murmured something she almost did not catch. "You don't have to fight alone anymore." She froze, staring at him in the dark, her breath caught in her throat. And though she said nothing back, those words stayed with her long into the night, burning in her heart like a new kind of fire. one she could not yet name. The night of the final battle came without warning. The colony had just begun to heal from the raid when the true enemy appeared. Her own people had returned, the ones who had betrayed her, the ones who had sold her in chains. Their ships landed outside the colony walls, shaking the ground with their engines. Soldiers poured out, armored and armed, their banners flying high. They had come to finish what they started, to take her back and destroy anyone who stood in their way. The alarm bells rang again, louder than before. Fear spread quickly through the colony. People rushed to gather their families, to hide, to run. Soldiers prepared for a fight, but their faces showed dread. This was not like the last raid. These were trained warriors, and they had come for blood. In the center of the chaos, she stood tall. Her eyes burned as she watched the ships land, her muscles tense with fury. She recognized the symbols on their armor, the same clan that had betrayed her, the same ones who had called her leader once and then thrown her into chains. Old wounds tore open in her chest. For years, she had dreamed of this moment, dreamed of vengeance. But now, something new stirred inside her too. She was not alone anymore. The mechanic stood at her side, gripping a weapon he had built from spare parts. His jaw tight, but his hands steady. "You don't have to do this," he said softly, looking up at her. "You can walk away." She turned to him, her expression sharp, but her voice low. "No, I have to, but I will not walk away this time, not without you." When the enemy soldiers marched forward demanding her surrender, the mechanic stepped in front of her. His voice was calm, but it carried across the crowd. "She stays here, with us." The soldiers laughed, mocking him, calling him weak, but before they could move, she stepped past him, her chains wrapped around her fists like weapons. "No," she growled. "With me." The battle erupted like thunder. The colony fought desperately, but it was she who turned the tide. She roared into the fight, her fury unleashed in full. She tore through soldiers, smashing their armor, breaking their weapons. Her chains lashed through the air like whips of steel. Every strike was a storm, every move a reminder of the leader she once was. But this time, she was not fighting for revenge alone. She was fighting to protect. The mechanic fought beside her, his improvised weapon crackling with sparks as he struck down enemies. He was slower, weaker than the warriors around him, but he never stepped back. More than once, he nearly fell. But she was there, her body shielding his, her strength covering his weakness. And more than once, she saw him step in front of her too, small but unshaken, daring anyone to strike her down. Together, they fought as if they were one. The enemy grew desperate. Their commander stepped forward, a towering figure in black armor, carrying a blade that glowed red in the firelight. "You were ours," he roared at her. "You will kneel again." Her chest rose and fell as she stared at him. For a moment, the memories of chains and betrayal clawed at her mind, but then she felt the mechanic's hand brush against her arm, steadying her. She looked into his eyes and saw no fear, only trust. And suddenly, the weight of her past shattered. She straightened, her voice cutting through the battlefield like thunder. "I kneel to no one," she charged. Their clash shook the ground. His blade slashed, her chains struck, sparks flew with every strike. The mechanic watched, heart pounding, ready to leap in if she fell. But she did not fall. With a final roar, she wrapped her chains around his blade, yanked it free, and drove him to the ground. Her fist came down, and the commander lay broken at her feet. The enemy soldiers froze. Without their leader, their courage crumbled. Some fled back to their ships, others dropped their weapons. The battle was over. The colony stood battered but alive, the ground littered with the weapons of the defeated. She stood in the middle of it all, her chest heaving, blood on her hands. For a long moment, she felt the silence press down on her. The people of the colony gathered, staring in awe. The woman they had once called untamable, the one they had feared, had saved them again. But this time, she was no longer a prisoner. She was their protector. The mechanic stepped forward, placing a hand on her arm. She turned to him, her fierce eyes softening for the first time. "It is over," he said quietly. She nodded slowly, but her gaze lingered on him. For years, she had carried only rage, only loneliness. Now, standing with him in the aftermath of battle, she felt something new, a bond stronger than chains, stronger than fear. When the council met the next day, no one dared to call for her death. No one dared to speak against her. She was free, and they all knew it. But when they asked her what she wanted, she did not claim power, nor did she demand revenge. She simply said, "I will stay." And when her eyes drifted to the mechanic beside her, everyone understood the truth. That evening, as the sun sank low, she sat outside the small house with him. The colony worked around them, repairing walls and clearing rubble, but for the first time, she felt no need to look over her shoulder. She was not untamable anymore. She was not alone. The mechanic leaned back, tired but smiling faintly. "So," he said, glancing at her, "what now?" She thought for a long moment, then let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Now, I learn what it means to be free." And for the first time in her life, the fiercest woman in the colony did not feel like a prisoner of her past. She felt something greater, like a storm that had finally found its calm, standing beside the only human who had dared to take her in.